make the PowerPoint full screen, I think I may not then be able to see you or the chat. So if there's anything, you know, I will talk, and if there's anything, sound, any problem, please feel free to speak.
Yeah, yeah, okay. So I just want, now it's recording, and I just want to make sure, maybe I ask the students to, Cassie, if you are here, could you please check the YouTube, whether it is on or not? Okay, live on YouTube. Yeah, but we can start. It's 2 o'clock now. Hello, everyone. Today is a Thursday, and today it's our third seminar on contemporary theatre. I'm very happy and honored to invite Professor Ferrari to be here, give us a talk. I'm Yuming Ao from the University of Göttingen. I'm a researcher at the Department of East Asian Studies, and we organize this seminar series, and today is the third one. And I would like to introduce Professor Ferrari. She's a professor of Chinese Studies at the University of Vienna, also in the Department of East Asian Studies, I think, right? Yeah. And her expertise is in intercultural performances, or and also transnational and also Chinese performances in the Chinese and publications. And today this talk will be based on her new book. It was published last year, right?
Yeah.
And also you will have another book. It's coming soon this year. Yeah, and it's an edited book about also the transnational theater performances in Hong Kong and also Singapore. And I am very interested in the theater performances crossing all kinds of borders, I think. For instance, different nations, different classes, you know, either politically or geographically borders. So I was wondering why and how we should look at Chinese theater from the perspective of a transnational. I think Professor Farina today will tackle this question. And I'm also very curious about how, you know, Chinese theater, how the notion of transnational Chinese theater is used as a method to reconfigure the nations, or as you said, the collective memories of the national histories. Yeah, this is very interesting, I think. So today, Professor Farina will give us a talk for about 1 hour, and afterwards we will open the floor to the audience for about half an hour, which is yeah, all kinds of questions concerning about this topic will be welcome, I think. Okay, so I'm very happy and honored to be here, and also Professor Farina, I will pass the microphone to you.
Yeah, can you hear me clearly? Is my sound clear, or everything is fine?
Yeah. Very good, yeah.
Okay, so thank you very much. I am honored to be here, and I would like to thank you, Dr. Ao, and the Center for Modern East Asian Studies at the University of Göttingen and your Department of East Asian Studies for the invitation. I'm actually very happy to have an opportunity to discuss the book because the book was published roughly a year ago, and it was just when the UK entered the first lockdown. I was still living in London at the time, so I actually never had a real life book launch. So obviously, this opportunity to discuss the topic of the book, even if online, it's extremely welcome for me. So thank you, and thank you to all the people who are here listening today. So now I will start my slideshow. I also thank you again for the poster, for designing this poster, which I immediately used as my cover. Okay. So as Professor Au mentioned, the talk today is based on my book, Transnational Chinese Theatres, Intercultural Performance Networks in East Asia. And the book defines transnational Chinese theatres as a theory, practice, and method of intercultural collaboration, which is based on networks. So the approach I'm taking to the performance cultures of the Sinophone or Chinese-speaking region is a relational approach, is a networked approach. So I'm trying to see and rethink Chinese language theatres from rhizomatic and relational perspective. And also the book attempts to rethink the theories of intercultural performance from the perspective of inter-Chinese or inter-Asian networks and from the perspective of Chinese theatre and Asian theatre more broadly. So I discuss also this notion in the book of rhizomatic interculturalism, so a type of interculturalism that is grounded on Asia, and it is also unfolds through networks of relationships. I wanted to point out that there is also a playlist associated with this book, which I created after the book was published to enable whoever is interested to watch the videos or clips or trailers of the performances that I mentioned in the book, and also to for researchers or teachers if they want to explore and see how these performances actually look like. And also there are small videos also including the photographs that are included in the book. So just to let you know that this resource exists. So I'm going to talk you through briefly the key concepts that inform this idea of transnational Chinese theatres. The first is the notion of Asia as method, which has been theorized by Chen Guanxin, the Taiwanese scholar. And the Taiwanese scholar, and also based on a previous theorization by Takeuchi Yoshimi, a Japanese sinologist who in 1960 already wrote an essay called Asia as Method. And the idea of Asia as method is to foreground Asia as a site of knowledge production, Asia as a point of reference, or what Chen Guanxin calls an anchoring point, to try, and I'm quoting Chen Guanxin here, to attempt a decolonization, de-imperialization, and de-Cold Warring of knowledge structures that are constructed in Asia and about Asia, and also in the context of my research, also to try and think of social processes and affective regimes which are discussed through performance in this through this theoretical perspective. And also with respect to the intercultural theory, I'm attempting to shift the point of reference, and this is again a phrase quoted from Chen Guanxin, his book Asia as Method, towards Asia. So try and see what happens if we think of intercultural theory from the perspective of Asia. Now I'm going to pause for a second because I see there's a, do you have any problems seeing my screen or?
Everything is fine.
Okay, because I saw a comment in the chat. Okay, so let's proceed. The second idea is the idea of interracial referencing, which has been discussed by several scholars, including the Singaporean sociologist Huat and the Japanese scholar of East Asian culture, popular culture, television and media, Iwabuchi Koichi. And the idea of interracial references is used in my book to interreference historical memory, memories which are often traumatic. So to see how collaboration across the Sinophone world and more broadly across East Asia can facilitate the comparison and the cross-referencing of historical memory. Also, a central idea that is developed in the book is the idea of intercity referencing, which is connected to the focus of the book on transnationalism, meaning connections and collaboration that occur on a transnational level rather than a national level. And this concept is developed in the book, in this book already, particularly in an introduction, but it is further developed in this forthcoming edited volume, which Dr. Au has just mentioned, Asian City Crossings, which I co-edited with Dr. Ashley Thorpe from Royal Holloway, University of London. And it is also includes essays by practitioners. So it's not only academic commentary on the notion of intercity referencing and city-to-city collaboration, but also comments by practitioners on how they address this type of collaboration. And our third concept is the notion of transnationalism, as I just mentioned, and particularly the idea of minor transnationalism proposed by François Lyonnais and Shisumei. And basically, I use this concept here to emphasize, as I just mentioned, the idea of connections and collaborations and networks that are initiated by artists and practitioners on an infranational or non-governmental, non-national level. So what I'm interested in here is not state-to-state or nation-to-nation interactions or collaborations that are initiated by governments, but collaborations that are initiated by artists on a more informal level. So I'm interested in relations that take place horizontally rather than vertically at the national level. Two more concepts. One is the idea of relational comparison, also proposed by Shisumei in the context of comparative literature. Basically, she proposes the idea of thinking of comparisons not as only or mere juxtaposition or comparison between similarities or difference, which as also others have also noted, they are quite essentialist, but to see a comparison as a relationship, as a relation, and therefore to take, again, a horizontal approach, which focuses on relations and continuities, both in the present and historically. And finally, the idea of dislocating the West, which Naoki Sakai has discussed. And in the context of my study, I borrow this concept to think about what happens to intercultural exchange and particularly collaboration when we remove the West or do not place the West at the center of the intercultural equation, as it often happens in conventional theories of interculturalism. And basically, the idea is to argue that the existing models of intercultural performance theories are not sufficient to theorize the type of networks, the types of entanglements that this book wants to explore. And also the book wants to emphasize the idea of collaboration, again, on a transversal or a horizontal axis. So in the particular context of this study, I look at East or quote unquote connections. So connections within the Sinophone region and between the Sinophone region and other nations or regions in East Asia. But potentially the method could also be applied to East-South or Southeast or South-South relations. And in terms of content and chapter organization, in terms of content and chapter organization, the book is arranged around the idea of significant chronotopes. So the significant chronotope is basically a time space of memory. They are sites of interreferences of historical memory and production of a Trans-Asian memory, which is a relational memory. So basically, concretely in practice, what happens when artists from, let's say, mainland China, Hong Kong, Taiwan, Japan, South Korea, come together to create a production that addresses one or more historical, traumatic historical points in the history of East Asia. So what happens when they face and deal with this historical moment collectively through performance? And this is why also it is valuable to try and think of Chinese or Chinese language theatres from the perspective of transnational and not only of the national. And one of the arguments of the book is basically that transnational collaboration and this process of collaborative memory making can serve as strategies of what Peter Hitchcock in his book Imaginary State calls transgressive imagination. And the capital N is intentional because it wants to foreground the potential of artistic, and in our case, performance representation, stage representation, to exceed and transcend or even transgress the components of national identity. And so basically, the overall idea here is to think of transnational Chinese theatres as a practice that crosses, that transgresses and transcends multiple dimensions, national, so geopolitical, but also geolinguistic, boundaries between media, between text, and between also genres, as the examples that follow will illustrate. So all of this theory and methodology is addressed mostly in the introduction and also in the second chapter of the book, in which I also briefly examine performative installation by Danny Yong, visual artist and theater maker from Hong Kong. This installation is called Poison Sweet, and it was created in Chengdu in 2002, and it basically involved the growing of weed, as you can see from this photograph, on site or along the stairs and the walls of the gallery space, of the exhibition space that was where the exhibition took place. And basically I used this installation, this performative installation, to illustrate certain theoretical points concerning the ideas of the rhizome from Deleuze and Guattari, the radicant, which was theorized by Nicolas Bourriot, who is a French art curator, and the idea of journey, which is a fundamental concept in this book, in the sense that obviously, or not, but collaborations occur through movement and mobility, but also many of these works thematize mobility, movement, and the journey as central to not only the production context, also to the aesthetics and to the form of the work. So to give an example from chapter 3, which is the first analytical chapter. This chapter focuses on the significant chronotype Hong Kong 1997, which is the year of the handover of Hong Kong from the UK to the PRC, to the People's Republic of China. And one of the examples examined in this chapter is this series of performances and visual arts projects, Journey to the East, produced by Zuni Icosahedron, or Zuni in short, which is a artistic collective based in Hong Kong. And this series actually took place on and off in slightly different formats for 20 years. And then its format, which I will illustrate in a moment, was also applied to subsequent artistic projects. So it's a work that was created in the context of Hong Kong 1997, but then grew into a more widely applicable collaborative endeavor. And so just to illustrate again an example within the example, the 1997 edition of this project was a collaboration between artists from Hong Kong, China, and Taiwan. And it did not only involve theater artists, but also filmmakers, visual artists, and critics from the 3 regions. And this is when Danny Yung, one of the artistic directors of Zuni, set the collaborative format for the series, which is 1 table, 2 chairs, which is the conventional stage set of Sifu, or Chinese opera, and 2 actors and 20 minutes. So all the participants, all the contributors were given this format to work with. And in this context, in the context of 1997, the 1 table and 2 chairs was often used allegorically, more or less explicitly in the productions, to hint at the 1 country, 2 systems covenant, which was sanctioned at that time to regulate the administration, the governance of Hong Kong after the handover. And later, from 1998, but particularly from 2000 onwards, the project became trans-Asian. It became more and more broader and broader, involving a high number of artists from the Sinophone region, from Asia in general, and also from the transnational artistic communities, Asian artistic communities worldwide. So, for example, Asian American artists also participated. And I can show you now this brief video in which Danny Yung explains what 1 table and 2 chairs is supposed to.
一桌二椅係中國傳統表演藝術嘅一個舞台裝置，佢同時亦都係代表咗中國傳統表演藝術嘅精華。呢個裝置呢，啟發咗簡約、靈活、多元嘅演繹、開放嘅閱讀嘅概念。我就係借咗呢個概念嚟推動世界文化交流同埋合作，因為我認為文化交流合作都應該簡約、靈活、多元演繹、開放閱讀呢啲元素。當然我都覺得一桌二椅作為文化交流合作呢，同時都有平等互動、相互合作嘅涵義。
So this was actually an example of how the format was used in different projects, in the sense that the context of this mini illustration of the format was a large project that Yung and Zuni organized in Hong Kong in 2017, called Hong Kong Belt Road City to City Forum or Conference, which also involved, as you have seen from the video, artists from Europe and the Middle East and South Asia, to try and think about this idea of the One Belt, One Road in a kind of critical manner. And these are some images from the 1997 edition, which I just mentioned. So you can see, for example, a work by Stanley Kwan, the well-known Hong Kong New Wave filmmaker who also participated. And here are images from the works by Li Kuxiu, who was a Taiwanese theater maker, and Li Liuyi, who is a mainland Chinese theater director. So you can see already from these photos how the table and the chairs are used in very different and often symbolical ways. For example, in this image, the chair is hanging. In other works, for example, one chair was hidden or it was missing, or and this was potentially supposed to infer certain allegorical meanings. And this is another image from the contribution by Edward Young, the New Taiwan cinema director, who also participated in 1997. And in the post-1997 editions, we had, again, Tammy Liang, the Taiwanese director, who created this work starring Li Kangcheng, who is also the actor who appears in all or almost all of his films. And on the right, you can see the work by Lin Zhaohua, which Lin Zhaohua, who is the director from Beijing, experimental theater director, and he cast a Beijing opera performer, and also Wen Wang, the Chinese documentary filmmaker, as a performer. So the man in the baklava standing on the left of the image is Wen Wang. So you can see how the work involved also a lot of interdisciplinarity or intermediality, as well as, you know, it was basically trying to push artists out of their comfort zone and try to explore other media. Here, Wen Jinghui from Beijing participated in 1999, and he performed in a work himself with his producer, Godali. And on the right, Zheng Lei, who is a choreographer and dancer from Macau, and Tian Mansa, who is a Sichuan opera performer who is now based in Shanghai. Here, you can see also how the format, you know, as I said, after 1997, it became a wider signifier of relationships. And that's why in the book, I talk about Zuni's theater of relations. So once 1997 was gone, the themes and the relationships that they came to be explored through this format became more diverse. For example, on the left, you can see a dancer from India, Asta Debu, who unfortunately passed away earlier this year, and Cedric Chan, who is a member of Zuni, a long-term member of Zuni. And when this work was created, I think Debu was in his 40s, late 40s, and Chan was in his 20s. So it was also supposed to explore not only cultural differences and encounters or relationship between differently trained performing bodies, but also between bodies of different ages. And on the right, that's another example of Japanese involvement in the series. So Shinichi Shintin, who is the director of Gekidan Kaitaisha in Japan. So basically, the work expanded, as I mentioned earlier. So you can see here among the list of participants, directors and filmmakers from Japan, from Singapore, from Hong Kong, North America, mainland China, Korea, South Korea, and other places. And eventually, the One Table and Two Chairs project was not only made in Hong Kong, but it was also used in other projects initiated by Zuni, but also by others, in fact, in mainland China, for example, in Nanjing and Beijing, in Tokyo, Yokohama, and Berlin, in Zurich and in Singapore, also in collaboration with local companies such as the Theatre Practice and Emergency Stairs. If you're interested in watching some examples of this one table and two chairs experiment, there are excerpts and full production videos available in my playlist on YouTube, but also and particularly, I would like to point out draw your attention to the Zuni Experimental Theatre Arts Archive, which is a large digital archive of Zuni's pieces produced since the company's establishment in 1982. And also on the YouTube channel, there's a lot of material which was actually not available at the time of my research, but now it is, so it's an incredibly useful resource. Chapter 4 tries to expand the remit, both conceptual and methodological and thematic, of transnational Chinese theatres to the wider East Asian region. So here we have not only one chronotope, but we have 3 or potentially 5, in the sense that the first one is the axis, Beijing, Taipei, 1945 or 1945 to 1949, basically the period in which the Sino-Taiwanese cross-strait tensions originated with the Chinese Civil War between after the 1945 and 1949, and then the establishment of the Kuomintang government on Taiwan. The second chronotope is based temporally and physically in Korea, and it is the site of the Korean Armistice Agreement, which was signed after the Korean War of 1950-53. And basically, this is important because this agreement sanctioned the beginning of what South Korean scholar Park Nak-chong calls the division system. So basically the long-term division and separation, not only geopolitical, but also affective between North and South Korea. And finally, another chronotope is Gwangju, which is a city in South Korea, 1980, which is the date, 18th of May, 1980, of a used to be called uprising, but it's not quite the correct term. It was a democracy movement taking place in South Korea. And in the performances that I'm going to present next, this chronotope intersects with other significant chronotopes that mark the occurrence of democracy movements also in Taiwan and China, namely the February 28th incident of 1947 in Taipei and the Tiananmen Square crackdown in China in 1989. And so one of the case studies examined in this context is the series of works called 38 Parallel, which is a collaboration between artists from Shanghai, a company called Cao Taiban Brass Stage, and collaborators from Hong Kong and from Taiwan, and also from South Korea. And the work, the first of the 2 works, premiered in South Korea in Gwangju in 2005. And it was meant to explore the legacies of the Cold War in East Asia. It was premiered in a festival whose purpose was to think about particularly the legacy of the Korean democratization movement and of social movements in East Asia more generally in the post-war period. And this, in terms of interreferencing, in terms of also cross-comparing geopolitical context and mnemonic regimes, The chapter tries to think through the idea of the division system, which I just mentioned, theorized by a South Korean scholar, and the China-Taiwan version, which Chen Kuan-xing formulates as the cross-strait system. And these two systems are examined in intellectual discourse and also in this chapter through the performances in a East Asian-wide perspective. So again, not from a national standpoint, but from a transnational standpoint. And yes, the Asian Madame is the name of the festival where this production premiered, and it was a festival focused on, in terms of theater style, on people's theater, which is a type of theater practiced widely in Asia. And so there were practitioners here from Hong Kong, from Taiwan, from South Korea, also from one performer from the United States. So all theater people's theater practitioners from all across the region presenting performances that addressed these themes. And I'm showing you some images. So as you can see also in terms of performance location, performance space, it was not staged in a conventional theater or auditorium, but in a tent, which was set up by a Japanese tent theater practitioner, Daito Sakurai, who has collaborated several times with practitioners in Taiwan and also more recently mainland China on the practice of tent theater. And from Taipei, one of the collaborators who perhaps some in the audience may know is Wang Mulin, who is a veteran of Taiwanese theater, who had also participated in other projects initiated by Grass Stage, this collective based in Shanghai. And at the time, the group, this network, presented themselves as the East Asia People's Theatre Network, EAPTN, which was basically a network that wanted to emphasize people-based solidarity. So again, this idea of minor transnationalism that I mentioned earlier, this idea of informal networks of collaborations, which are also meant to explore or facilitate informal processes of reconciliation through the arts. And also here, another concept that is relevant here is this idea of Mintian, so people-based or non-governmental, people-to-people East Asia. So an idea of East Asia and a dialogue taking place in East Asia, not at the official governmental level, but at the Mintian, at the grassroots level. And these works were performed, so the first installment was performed in South Korea and in Shanghai at the Downstream Garage, which used to be a performance space in Shanghai, which is now closed. And the second installment, 38 Parallel in Taipei, was performed in Taipei in the same year. So these are some images of the performance in South Korea. So the performance is a physical theater performance. There are very little spoken parts, but there are videos, the videos that were created for the performance, and also they use archival film footage relating to the Korean War and the Korean division, as well as to the democracy movements that I just mentioned, and generally images from the Cold War period in East Asia, as well as photographs, so film footage and photographs. So you can see from here some of these images. And I can show you the opening video, which is interesting because it shows how this division mentality, so this on the Korean Peninsula, but also the argument of the performance is that this division mentality, this hostility, this sense of being connected, but also being extremely different, is also plays out across the Taiwan Strait. So this video shows how this mentality is ingrained in citizenship already from the formative stages of life, so in school, And you can see, so I will show it. This is from the playlist. Yes, and there are other clips on from this production on YouTube, if you would like to see them. Yeah, this is a photo of the Taipei performance in which, in addition to one morning, also other performers from Shanghai and Taipei participated, including perhaps practitioners that you may know, such as Dong Qiao from Taipei and Deng Xian from Shanghai. In terms of chapter 5, this chapter also intersects multiple significant chronotopes, or different time spaces of memory. Basically, the chapter focuses on works which are adapting or are somehow inspired by a play written in 1998 by Ko Pao Kun, this Singaporean playwright, called The Spirits Play, in Xi. And the play is allegorical reflection on the period of the Japanese occupation in Singapore from 1942 and 45. Not that the play is explicit about that, it basically centers on the stories of 5 spirits who are existing in a limbo on an unnamed island, which could be taken as a metaphor for Singapore, during the occupation. And the spirits, although they have symbolic names such as the general, the mother, the girl, the poet, and the man, they are actually characterized in some ways that make them recognizable as spirits as Japanese spirits. And the productions examined in this chapter intersect this chronotope with other contemporaries or events relating to the Second World War, namely the Nanjing Massacre of 1937 in China, but also again with the memory of democracy movements in Taiwan and Beijing and China. So again, 228 and June 4th in China. So the first, let's say, case study, which is again a series composed of two works called The Mother Hen Next Door and The Mother Hen Next Door, a tribute, which was created by two authors, performers, two women, one from Hong Kong and one from Taipei, and they started the devising process in Singapore. So you can see again the transnational nature of this collaboration. And then they performed the first version, which was a bilingual version in Taiwan. And then they reprised it for the Kopakun Festival in Singapore in 2012. And this version was also performed later in Taiwan and Macau. And I think it was supposed to be performed again in Taiwan last year, but I'm not sure it happened because of the pandemic. And this work is not an adaptation or direct adaptation of the Spirits play, but it takes the idea of spirits stuck in a limbo as a starting point to cross-memorialize the February 28 incident and Tiananmen Square. I will show you later a clip that will explain the basic plot, so I'm not going to discuss that now. Yes, now. So you can see here the two productions have slightly different size. Also, the stage setting of the first one particularly is also reminiscent to a certain extent of Samuel Beckett's Waiting for Godot, because it involves these two spirits, these two women are spirits, sitting on a bench by a lanky tree and constantly announcing that they're going to go to the afterlife, actually never doing so because of memories they have that keep holding them back. And particularly one of them on the left is a mother who has lost her son in an uprising or in a riot, as it's called, qualified by the official dom in the play. And she's reluctant to leave this limbo because she's not sure whether her son is coming or if he's alive or dead. So I will show you the trailer, which explains. Yeah. And yes, again, on the YouTube playlist, you can also see trailers and photo galleries of the previous version of 2010. And finally, I am going to briefly mention this other production, also examined in the final analytical chapter of the book, which is an adaptation of the Spears play. It's a collaborative adaptation, co-directed by Hong Kong director Danny Yung. Again, Zuni features prominently in this book, as you may have realized by now. And Sato Makoto, who is a theater maker from Japan, based in Tokyo. And what is interesting in this adaptation is that it merges not only languages and memories, and but also actors from different performing traditions. So the cast includes Kunchi performance from Nanjing, no theater performance from Tokyo, from this Tessenkai, which is a company that has worked quite extensively with kind of cross-generic or experiments. Recently, they produced a North version of Farewell to My Concubine, for example. And then contemporary dance and theater actors from Tokyo. And in the first version, there was also Jinju, a Beijing opera performer, and a classical Indian dancer, but these do not appear in the second version. And this also was created transnationally and performed transnationally across the region. And this too interreferences the memories of the Second World War, of Japanese imperialism in Singapore and China, again, through the summoning, since we're talking about spirit, the conjuring of the memory of Nanjing, as well as because of the figure of the mother here, they also try to connect to the collective group known as the Tiananmen Mothers in China. And these are images. So the first part was directed by Sato Makoto, and the second part was directed by Danny Yung. The casts were not identical, but some actors appeared in both versions. And whereas the first is a more direct staging of Kopakon's play, it is in Japanese, but the Jinju, and in the first version, the Jinju performance obviously sing in their own tradition. And there were also texts projected at the back in Chinese, English, and Japanese, as you can see in this image. And here the performance, the one on the left, is a no theater actor from Tessenkai, but they were not wearing the traditional costumes. They were only wearing some minimal markers of their own performing traditions, such as, for example, masks. And this other actor is a Japanese actor trained in the Suzuki method, so contemporary theater actor. And the idea was to try and experiment with connection of not only, again, of cultures and languages, but also genres within the same culture. And the second part was directed by Danny Yung, and it featured heavy use of projections, which is typical of Jung's style, but also typical of Jung's style is that of the spirit play, it does not really it does not really adapt the work directly, but it takes some symbols, some images, which then are developed in a rather abstract way. And particularly Jung emphasized, and that is why the title is The Spirit's Play, Ritual to soothe the unsettled spirits. He conceptualized his part as also as a ritual in memory of the spirits of the events that are commemorated, as well as a tribute to Kopakon, since the work in 2012 was presented at the Kopakon Festival in Singapore, which was held on the year of the 10th anniversary of Ko's passing. Let me check the time. We have a few minutes, so I can show you the shorter video. And then again, I refer you to the playlist for the longer excerpt, just to give a sense of. Yes. And finally, I think we're about with time. Finally, in the last chapter, which is the conclusion, in addition to summarizing the main topics of the book, and to suggest also, in addition to suggesting also the idea of expanding the concept of transnational Chinese theatres to a concept of transnational Asian theatres, in the sense that this model potentially could be applied to different types of networks in addition to the ones I have examined in terms of genres and in terms of regional origin and in terms of languages. And also I'm trying to think here of the idea of transing Asia. So what does transing Asia mean? So one meaning is across or through Asia, so the inter-Asian trajectories that this book is focusing on intersections within Asia, but also, for example, between Northeast Asia and South and Southeast Asia, which could provide very interesting and important case studies. But also transing Asia could mean beyond Asia. So I'm trying to think about the possibility of exploring connections, not only within Asia, but also between Asia and Africa, or Asia and the Middle East, Asia and Latin America. So to explore what Shu and Leona, again, in minor transnationalism, call transcolonial solidarities. So again, to apply this method of decentering the West from intercultural collaboration by looking at collaboration between Asia and other regions, as well as potentially it could be interesting to try and apply this method to look at the cultural ramifications of official initiatives, such as, for example, the Belt and Road, which I mentioned earlier, but also others. And for example, after this book was published, I also did a research on China-Latin American connections. And those connections also are important because of the strategic importance of Latin America now in terms of economic investment on the Chinese side. And so it would be interesting to do a more extensive study of transing Asia or transnational Asia, also across this transcontinental and trans-Pacific trajectories, perhaps in another book. And yes, and I am done now with my talk. So thank you for listening. And I welcome questions. Maybe there are already questions in the chat. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Professor Ferrari. This is a wonderful talk, a lot of new ideas. And also, this talk exactly corresponds to our last seminar, which is given by Director Wang Chong and also puppetry Li Shasha. And we talked about arts collaboration and cross borders in arts. So I'm wondering here, so for instance, in fact, theater, or we can say performances, it's kind of a media for Professor Yu to look at these kind of transnational or the trans approaches which you applied in your research, which I think it's actually directed to the historical and also your studies of memory studies, I think. Yeah. But I guess maybe some of the students will have questions to you. We'll come back to the theaters because I think the book, I just want to repeat the name of the book again. The book, Professor Ferrari's book, is Transnational Chinese Theatres, Intercultural Performance Networks in East Asia, which was published last year. Yeah. And in your book, you used a lot of examples, the collaborations between across borders, across nations, and also across actually also different medias, I think. Okay. Yeah. So if you have any questions for our professor, maybe you can just raise up your hand and turn on your microphone, and or you can type in the widget box.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello. Yeah, nice to meet you, Professor Ferrari. And I'm also a master student of the theater studies. So my question is that I want to know how the method you choose to collect your productions of the theater and as your research materials, and how long you do these works?
So how long have I've done this work? Well, it was a long research.
Yeah.
It started, well, actually it started with my previous research, which was a book on experimental theater in mainland China. And the main case study there was the work of Meng Jinghui. And through Meng, I found Meng Jinghui. Typing. Meng Jinghui and
yes, Meng Jinghui.
yeah, and through Meng Jinghui, I found out about his collaborations with Zuni. He participated in Journey to the East, as I showed a picture earlier, but he also did a collaboration with Danny Jung, Edward Young, Stan Lai Xuan, and was there Meng, of course, on King Lear. So they did a four-part King Lear. So I watched those videos and I found them very interesting. And so that's how the research started. So it started almost 10 years ago. And originally it was meant to focus only on the Sinophone world, because that is where my expertise lies in terms of also accessing the primary sources in the original language. But then I started realizing that not only Zuni, but also the other groups in China or in the Sinophone world, such as the theater practice in Singapore or grass stage in Shanghai, had actually expanded the scope of this inquiry through the whole region. And in fact, for example, grass stage has also done collaborations in India, which I don't explore here, but they would be definitely interesting to explore in terms of non-Western centric theater relations. So that's how it started. And then I discovered the collaboration between on the Mother Hen Next Door through a colleague who attended the performances in Singapore. So then I did some field work in all of the regions, either directly or, for example, in the case of Japan, I interviewed Sato Makoto and met a couple of the actors who were present in the Spirits play in Nanjing, where I went for another research project connected to this, an article called Asian Theatre as Method. And so that's where I also accessed the Japanese collaborators. And then I gathered more materials in Shanghai and Hong Kong, of course. What was the first question?
Okay.
Oh, if I answered your question, then I think there was a first part which I couldn't hear properly. If there is anything else outstanding from your question, please let me know.
Maybe
Okay. Great.
Songjia is your question, right? And
Yes, it's a very good question. Answer. I got all of it. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. I see also a question in the chat. What's the difference between cultural theatre and transnational theatre? So that is a good question, and it's not an easy one to answer. The idea of transnational Chinese theatres came from actually there is a book on cinema called Transnational Chinese Cinemas, edited by Sheldon Lu. And that book actually made me think about why is there so much debate on transnational Chinese cinemas, and also on the idea of Chinese cinemas in the plural, right? Meaning that there cannot be only one articulation of Chinese cinema and Chineseness. So that made me think about the transnational scope. And I try to address this idea of transnationalism through this idea of people-based, artist-led collaboration. But then at the same time, in addition to the transnational, so the encounter of national identities, national memories, and transnational networks based on localities, cities, places in different nations of Asia, These works are also intercultural in the sense that they interweave cultural elements from different cultures. And actually, in the introduction of the book, I make a distinction between trans and inter in the sense that I don't take them as synonyms. Sometimes you see intercultural theater, transcultural theater, transnational theater, cross-cultural theater used as synonyms, but in fact, I think they address different levels of engagement. So the trans is more about this idea of transcending borders, of identity of nations, of languages, whereas the inter is more of this idea of relations, more of this idea of different styles of performance coming together. And at the same time, I was also, like many other scholars, I think, of non-Western so-called theaters, dissatisfied with the models that are available to us in terms of intercultural performance theory. And therefore, I tried also, at the same time as I tried to expand the scope of Chinese theaters, I also tried to rethink intercultural performance theory, and how that could work if we shift the emphasis from the East-West canonical, comparison or equation to the an East Asia-focused model. Obviously, also taking inspiration from other scholars, for example, Daphne Lay, who has worked extensively on connections between different Shishi traditions and has also discussed the hegemonic nature of intercultural theater, and also the idea of the rhizome applied to intercultural theater has also been discussed by others. So that's how I try to connect the trans and the inter together. And thank you for the question. That's a very useful one.
It's a question which often asked by scholars, and yeah. So I was also wondering, but I think I read an article from Professor Zhou Yunlong from Xiamen Daxue, Xiamen University, and I think it's quite provides me quite a lot of inspirations. I think he put forward these concepts that public space for the expectation and also performance, rather than to emphasize this kind of how to say, for instance, this post-colonial culture criticism, these theories, to try to contrast these Western and East, theaters, practices, and theories. But he emphasized that the agent, that means like the theater practices or dramatists, they actually act as an agent, which brings all kinds of imaginations from one side to another. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this is quite interesting, I think. So there is a question from, there's a couple of questions.
Yes. There is another question from, actually, because Mona Lisa made a comment about Daphne Lay. Yes, Daphne Lay is also one of the authors she's also one of the contributors of the second book I mentioned earlier, Asian City Crossings, which expands on this notion of collaboration from the perspective of the city, and particularly the post-colonial city. And this connects me to the question of Isabelle Henry-Ondoucy that asks how are post-colonial theories relevant? Well, in transnational Chinese theatres, I do not engage post-colonialism directly, although it is there present all over the book for the simple reason that the book addresses post-colonial context, Hong Kong, after 1997, Singapore, which was colonized both by the Japanese and by the British. So although I do not address the performances from the perspective, I do not look at the performances from the perspective of post-colonialism, clearly the post-colonial context is there, and also the idea of looking at interculturalism in Asia is also, I think, that we encounter in East Asia, and it's not only you know, Western colonialism, but also the intra-regional colonialism, particularly in the case of case studies of Japan. So that is important. And decolonial theories, I think what I'm trying to do in terms of rethinking interculturalism from the perspective of Asia, from the perspective of Asia as method, from the perspective of networks rather than, you know, centered somewhere in particular, that is an attempt, you know, to dislocate the West, as I said, which could be seen as an attempt to foregrounding some sort of decolonial methodology or decolonial practice. And I also found very useful when thinking about comparison here, an essay by Walter Mignolo, is that how you pronounce his name? Who is obviously one of the main theories of decoloniality. Yeah, I asked about the pronunciation because on paper it reads very Italian to me, although he's of course Argentinian and works in the States, and his work on pluriversality, his work on in which he emphasizes the importance of relating rather than comparing. That was very also important for me in terms of thinking through these topics. And relating rather than comparing means that I'm not interested here in establishing comparison and for example, when I look at adaptations, or this is similar, this is different, or ideas of fidelity or of, you know, faithfulness to the original. That's not what I'm interested in. What I'm interested in is to see what happens when through the collision, if you were, through the relation that is triggered by these encounters. Yeah, and there's a question there actually about to share the similar situations of difficulties, to share the differences. Yeah, as I said, I think, you know, the idea is to go beyond similarities and differences. Obviously, in the process of creating these works, there's a lot of there are a lot of conversations taking place in the rehearsal rooms, according to my informants, of course. But also, I attended some workshops and rehearsals where the cast and the crew and the directors and the creative team were sharing experiences. For example, in the work on North and South Korea, China, Taiwan, I know that the cast, which was actually a group of non-professionals, they were not professional actors, talked a lot about the experience of the war. I think they interviewed and read testimonies, oral histories from Chinese veterans of the Korean War, and then they discuss with their South Korean collaborators as well to try and find some common ground, you know, on which to build the work. So I think it's both, you know. I think these works they show that certain memories are shared and certain memories are comparable, but also by connecting these chronotopes, it also wants to show how differently artists react to the same memory. For example, think of the one table and two chairs. You have in the 1997 edition, you had 6 or 8 works based on one table and two chairs, and all of them somehow had one country, two systems at the back, you know, of their concept. but the engagement with the one table and two chairs and the one country, two systems were completely different. So you could say that they shared a similar situation, and they had a similar challenge of creating a work with only one table, two chairs and two actors. But then the result, rather than showing the similarity, highlighted the difference in approaches, which is very much connected to the different background and experiences and cultural baggage that these artists bring with them. Two questions. Between your notion of relation and rhizomatic. A second, I also noticed in your book, the West. Yes, the non-West imperialism, basically, what I'm trying to express there, and again, I take back that idea in the edited volume, Asian City Crossings, is that it's not that if you de-West, so if you remove the West from the center of the intercultural collaboration, or if you leave it there, but as a one among equals, let's say. But let's say it's a collaboration like between Asian practitioners. The fact that they are all Asian practitioners does not prevent one of these practitioners to take a dominant role or even an imperialistic role, in the sense that you know, I don't want to suggest with this book that transnational Chinese theatres and intercultural collaborations, if they happen in Asia, then they are always, you know, equal and democratic and peaceful, and everybody's nice to each other. This is far from true. You know, you also have to think in practical terms. First of all, you know, for example, in the China-Japan collaboration, sometimes there were tensions in terms of how people remembered the actual experience of imperialism of Japan in China. But at the same time, think also of the practicalities, the money. Where does the money come from? So clearly, if you do an intercultural project in Asia, but bulk of the funding and the resources come from one particular company or one particular city or one particular region organization, then the risk is that this organization takes on an imperialistic role in that sense. And the dynamics of power, you know, economic power in East Asia are clearly not equal, you know, between Northeast Asia and South Asia and Southeast Asia, or even within Southeast Asia itself. You know, you can't compare Singapore with economically more disadvantaged countries in the same region. And then you have, the first one, relation and rhizomatic. Well, the short answer is that the rhizome is relational. So, so the rhizome is a figure for some kind of relation, which is supposedly, theoretically, a-centered and does not privilege one element over the others. So relationally used to characterize the rhizome. The nature of the rhizome is relational, but also I use relational in the context of Shumei's notion of relational comparison. So again, of using comparative structures in a relational way rather than similarities, juxtapositional way, you know, similarities versus differences. And thirdly, I use the theory of the radicant by Nicolas Bourriaud, who also wrote an important book previously, or important, or anyway, influential in the art circles, called Relational Aesthetics. So talking about aesthetics, which is created again through human relations. So that's the connection. So the one does not exclude the other. But I guess relational is a wider term, you know, a lot of, and the rhizome is only one example of a theory that you can use to express relations. The network is another one. It's also relational. Erika Fischer-Lichter, the famous theater scholar, has talked about the idea of interweaving performance cultures. So I see that also as a relational approach to performance cultures. So that is one answer. The Russian literary concept of the chronotope. So yeah, the chronotope, basically I use it, it clearly derives from Bakhtin. I do not really engage with the Bakhtin's theory in my context. I simply use it to suggest a time space, a size of memory of it's a site of memory mostly in which these which catalyze these collaborations, and also I after I started thinking through you know, organizing the material through the idea of the chronotope, because you know, I had a lot of material and I needed somehow to find a way of organizing it. But also there is another scholar who has used the chronotope in a similar way before me, and that scholar is Michael Berry, who is based at UCLA, and he has written a book called A History of Pain, which looks at literature and film. And also his book is structured around significant, he doesn't use the word significant chronotopes, but he uses the word chronotope to suggest basically temporal and spatial knots of memory. And in particular, he looks at Nanjing, 228, the Cultural Revolution, and other significant moments. So I'm not really trying to engage with Bakhtin here. I'm basically using the Bakhtinian definition to suggest this again, this influence, yeah, of temporal and significant temporal and spatial sites.
Okay, thank you very much for the comments and also questions from the audiences. It's a wonderful talk and also wonderful questions from you. And as we all know that Professor Ferrari is going to edit another book, Asian City Crossing, Pathways of Performance through Hong Kong and Singapore. If you don't mind, would you like to give us a little bit information about your new idea in this book in the last couple of minutes?
Of course, thank you. The question, yes, the Asian City Crossings is actually a side project, because as it happens when you start working on a topic, then you collect a lot of material and you have a lot of things that don't fit. And so basically there was this idea of the city to city, the city-based collaborations and exchanges, which is another idea that Danny Jung has discussed in connection with this One Table and Two Chairs, so as a framework to connect cities. And that, as I mentioned, appears somehow in the introduction of Transnational Chinese Theatres, but it's not developed extensively. And so I wanted to explore that more deeply. And then we held a conference in London a few years ago, supported by the Chanting-Ko Foundation. And we had Danny Jung and members of Zuni coming, and performers from Nanjing, from the Kunchi Yuan in Nanjing, and scholars from various places to discuss this idea of collaboration and this idea of city to city. And that conference was focused on Hong Kong, because it was organized to mark the anniversary of the handover. It was in 2017. But then there were several practitioners and also scholars from Singapore, and we realized that because of some similarities in the historical and economic development of and political of the two cities, post-colonial cities, global Asian cities, both have a legacy of imperiality in the sense that they were both colonized by the British and then by the Japanese. Asian dragons, in terms of economics, they have a number of stereotypes also attached to them, also multilingual, multicultural. So we decided to, with Ashley Thorpe, who was also one of the speakers at the time, to expand the inquiry and include both cities. And also we invited practitioners to comment on this idea of city-to-city exchange, not only between these two cities, but also between these cities and other cities in Asia. So we have chapters, for example, by Mok Chiu or Augustine Gus Mok, who is a veteran of social theatre, and he's also an activist from Hong Kong. He's done a lot of work in people's theatre, playback, forum theatre. And then we have an essay by Danny Young on the notion of city to city, which I translated. And then we have an essay by two essays by Singaporean practitioners, Kok Hang Leong, who is the director of Drama Box, and Liu Xiaoyi, who is the director of a company called Emergency Stairs. And we have an interview with a practitioner who works between Singapore and the UK. So it's a hybrid, let's say, book in between scholarship and practice. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. We're looking forward to its publication, which will come out this year.
In May. It should come out in May. We've done the proofs recently, so hopefully.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank
you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, everyone. And I think that's the end of this seminar. You can find the book, and you can buy the book and read, and also watch the playlist mentioned by Professor Ferrari. And also, as Professor mentioned, that it's not just limited to the inner Asian, but also could be another book or project for you. It's could be transcontinental continents and also beyond Asia. As we know, just a couple of days ago, the Polish, very famous, well-known director, Christian Luber, he made this adaptation from Lu Xun's work, Diary of the Amendments Diary. So we would like to see also these kind of collaborations across more boundaries and borders. Thank you very much, Professor.
Thank you for the invitation again, for designing the poster. I hope we will have a chance to meet in person, since we are sort of close territorially. And also thank you for the audience and everybody who listened and asked questions. Thank you for the questions. Very, very interesting for me to think about. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay. And for anyone who would like to have watch this video, and also some other friends would like to listen to this seminar, please contact me. I will share the link. Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Bye. Thank you. Bye.